feet were really high then, and the referee's just allowed it to go on. That had to be dangerous play, yes, by Eddie McCreadie on Billy Bremner.
He didn't chase attention, he chased the ball. And when he caught it, he turned defense into movement, and movement into moments the crowd would never forget. Eddie McCreadie didn't look like a revolution, no swagger, no slogan. Just a sharp eye, a clean tackle, and a pair of boots that could outrun your fastest winger. But watch the tapes if you can find them, and you'll see a left back who was 10 years ahead of his time. He didn't just mark attackers, he left them behind. Didn't just boot the ball away, he carried it forward as if the final third belonged to him. In the 60s, they didn't have heat maps. If they did, his would have burned both flanks. Up and down, game after game, always forward. From a Glasgow schoolboy with a part-time job to one of Chelsea's most quietly iconic figures, he did it all with pace, humility, and a face the cameras never lingered on. No statue, no mural. Just memory etched in the minds of those who knew what they were watching. Subscribe if you still believe in the men who let their feet speak and left the applause for someone else. Born on April 15, 1940 in Glasgow, Edward Graham McCreadie grew up in a city where football wasn't a dream. It was the streetlight, the escape, the only thing that mattered. In the alleyways of the Goreballs, he carved out his rhythm, not with flash, but with focus. By the time he joined East Stirlingshire, it was clear he had something different. Not the brute strength of a centre-half, but the intelligence of a man who could read 3 moves ahead and the engine to make the next one himself. He didn't stand out in a crowd, but Chelsea saw him anyway. In 1962, Chelsea paid £5,000 to East Stirlingshire for him, a quiet move that would echo for decades. No fanfare, no press. Just a soft-spoken Scot who would come to redefine what a fullback could do. And almost instantly, he was in the first team picture, not just as a defender, but as a new kind of threat. While the game moved sideways, McCreadie ran forward. While defenders hoofed it long, he looked for angles, always one pass, one overlap, one sprint ahead. He didn't throw himself into tackles like Ron Chopper Harris, didn't fly through the air like Bonetti, but he didn't need to. Because what Eddie brought was subtle, tactical, game-changing. By the early 60s, he was no longer just a good signing. He was a cornerstone. And Stamford Bridge had found a new kind of hero, one who attacked from the back and let his football speak for itself. For over a decade, Eddie McCreadie ran the left flank at Stamford Bridge like it was his own private road. Between 1962 and 1973, he made 410 appearances for Chelsea, everyone built on anticipation, stamina, and discipline. He wasn't loud, he was just always there. He scored just 5 goals, but one of them lives forever. 1966. FA Cup semi-final. Sheffield Wednesday. McCreadie picked it up in his own half and just went. Past one, past two. A full-back slicing through a midfield like a striker. He ran 80 yards and buried it. Left foot, bottom corner. The goal that took Chelsea to Wembley. Not bad for a defender. A year earlier, he'd helped Chelsea lift the 1965 League Cup, beating Leicester over 2 legs. He wasn't the headline, but he was the reason the headlines were possible. He kept things moving, kept things solid, did the job that let others shine. For Scotland, he earned 23 caps between 1965 and 1969. Not a regular in the newspapers, but always trusted by his managers, always called up for the big games, England, Wales, Yugoslavia. He never looked out of place. While the game around him still clung to the old model static fullbacks, long clearances, McCreadie was already playing tomorrow's football. One of the first in England to defend like a thinker and attack like a winger. No slogans, no stardom. Just 90 minutes, done right. By the late 1960s, injuries began to creep in. The legs that had once outrun everyone started to slow. Chelsea were changing, and so was Eddie McCreadie. In 1968, he made his final regular appearance. But in the brutal 1970 FA Cup final replay at Old Trafford, he was there again, no fuss, no flash, just tackles and courage. Chelsea beat Leeds, and Eddie walked away a winner. And by 1971, his time at Stamford Bridge as a player was over. He He built toward another European final, but injury kept him out of Chelsea's victorious 1971 Cup Winners' Cup final in Athens. But Eddie wasn't finished with football. He turned to coaching first at Chelsea, then across the Atlantic, where a new world of football was taking shape. In the early 70s, he joined the wave of British talent heading for the NASL, a league still finding its feet but filled with opportunity. He just built teams, built belief, built football in a country still calling it soccer. But in 1975, Chelsea came calling again. The club was struggling. The flair of the 60s had faded, finances were tight, morale lower, so they turned to someone who knew the badge, who knew the fans, and who wouldn't need a spotlight to do the job. Eddie McCreadie became Chelsea manager in April 1975. No fanfare, just trust earned over years, not sound bites. And once again, he started rebuilding not with money, but with courage. He even handed the captaincy from John Hollins to 18-year-old Ray Wilkins, turning trust into leadership. He brought through kids, trusted youth, and in time, he would lead them back to where they belonged. When Eddie McCreadie took charge of Chelsea, the club was drifting, crowds were thinning, debt was mounting, and worse, the soul of the team had gone quiet. But Eddie knew what mattered. He didn't call in stars. He looked at the youth system. He trusted kids. And from that belief came names that would define the next Chelsea era: Ray Wilkins, Tommy Langley, Mickey Droy, Gary Locke, Steve Wicks. They were young, raw, some still teenagers, but McCreadie gave them the shirt and the responsibility. In the 1976-77 season, Chelsea, against all odds, fought their way out of the second division. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't glamorous, but it was everything the club needed. Promotion was sealed on the final day in front of over 50,000 fans at Stamford Bridge, a 1-0 win over Nottingham Forest. Tension thick, nerves brutal, but McCreadie's boys got it done. Chelsea were back in the first division, and Eddie had done it with kids, belief, and not a penny spent on transfers. But then, just weeks after that triumph, he was gone. No celebration tour, no long farewell, just a dispute over a company car. The club offered a car loan. Eddie wanted a permanent vehicle, something befitting a manager who had just saved the club. The board said no. Eddie walked. Just like that. Fans were stunned. Players were devastated. One of the club's great unsung rebuilders pushed out not by failure, but by pride, principle, and a line in a contract. To this day, it remains one of the most abrupt, surreal exits in Chelsea history. After leaving Chelsea in 1977, Eddie McCreadie didn't storm the media. He didn't line up his next job. He stepped away from Stamford Bridge and after a final chapter coaching in America, quietly left the game behind. No memoir, no punditry, no farewell tour. He returned briefly to America, coaching the Memphis Rogues again in the late 1970s, still shaping the game in a place that barely knew what a fullback was. He became manager of the Memphis Rogues, even stepping onto the pitch himself for one game in 1979. Bringing structure, discipline, and that trademark quiet intensity to a league still learning the meaning of tactics. But by the early 1980s, Eddie McCreadie had stepped away fully. From the touchline, from the spotlight, from the sport he'd helped build on 2 continents. He settled in Knoxville, Tennessee, thousands of miles from the chance of Stamford Bridge. No interviews, no returns, no looking back. For decades, Chelsea fans wondered, where was he? What did he think of the club's rise, its fame, its reinvention? But Eddie never commented, never appeared. He was the rare football man who truly meant it when he walked away. In a game where everyone wants to be remembered, he made peace with being forgotten. But the real ones didn't forget. He never asked for applause, but those who played with him, those who learned from him, they never stopped clapping. Ron Harris, his captain, once called him one of the best attacking fullbacks this club ever had, miles ahead of his time. Tommy Docherty, who brought him down from Scotland, knew it from day one. He had something you couldn't coach courage on the ball. And Ray Wilkins, the boy Eddie trusted when few others would, never forgot. He gave me my chance. He trusted me when I was just a kid, I owe him everything." They said he was quiet, but his impact echoed in every run down the line, every clearance turned counterattack, every young player who found their voice through his belief. He didn't just play fullback, he redefined it. At a time when defenders were told to stay put, he broke the line and never looked back. He didn't just manage Chelsea, he saved them. At their lowest ebb, he found a way back up and then walked away when pride demanded it. There were no statues, no street names. But in 2020, when Chelsea celebrated legends past, his name reappeared in tributes, in memories, in the hearts of those who hadn't forgotten. For Chelsea's old guard, McCreadie wasn't just a player or a coach, he was a standard of modesty, of grit, of getting the job done without needing to shout about it. And today, when the club stands in billion-pound boots, with lights and cameras on every corner, some still whisper his name. He never returned for the applause, never asked for statues, never craved the chance. And still, Eddie McCreadie, now 85, lives quietly far from Stamford Bridge, far from the headlines, but never far from memory. He didn't need the modern game, didn't fit its noise, its spectacle, its obsession with branding over backbone, but those who know those who wore the badge, who stood in the shed end, who remember Chelsea when it was grit and thunder, they never forgot him. To this day, there's no official stand in his name, no bronze likeness by the gates. But in the whispers of legacy, in the reverent nods from those who played beside him, Eddie remains. Not just a player, not just a manager, a moment in Chelsea's soul. And maybe that's the most fitting tribute of all, that he quietly walked away. He spent his later years in Knoxville, selling carpets, walking unnoticed through quiet streets. Football never heard from him again, but it never forgot his name. Subscribe if you still believe in players who didn't chase attention. They chased the ball instead. Eddie McCreadie, the man who changed Chelsea and never once asked for credit.